Chapter 1. A Sea of Impossible Calm. The hum was the first constant. It was the sound of survival, a low thrum that vibrated through the composite floor plates of Aegis Station, up through the soles of Kenji Tanaka's boots, and into the base of his skull. It was the sound of 1,000 machines working in perfect concert, atmospheric regulators, water purifiers, carbon dioxide scrubbers. It was the sound of a bubble of life sustained against a force that should have torn it to atoms. Outside the triple-paned polycarbonate viewport, the wall of the storm was a solid, churning mass of gray and white. It moved with a slow, hypnotic violence, a perpetual motion machine the size of a country. For 3 years, it had not moved from its position in the mid-Atlantic. For 3 years, Aegis Station had floated in the serene, sunlit water of its eye, a circle of impossible calm 27 miles wide. Kenji turned from the window. His workstation was an altar of data. 3 primary monitors displayed cascading streams of information: wind speed at the eye wall, barometric pressure gradients, thermal imaging, satellite relays that painted the storm as a perfect, terrifying spiral. He was a meteorologist. A storm of this magnitude and permanence was not a weather event. It was a cosmological anomaly. It was his life's work. His fingers moved across the keyboard, his motions precise and economical. He was compiling the daily telemetry report for the commander. The numbers were, as always, staggeringly consistent. Wind speeds at the outer edge of the eye peaked at 215 miles per hour. The pressure in the center was a stable 880 millibars, a void that should have collapsed on itself ages ago. Yet, it persisted. A soft chime announced an incoming call on his console. He tapped the receiver icon. The face of Station Commander Isla Madsen appeared on his secondary screen. Her features were sharp, framed by dark hair pulled into a severe, functional knot. Her expression was neutral, a carefully maintained state of operational readiness. "Tanaka," she said, her voice clear and without preamble. "Your report." "Almost complete, Commander," Kenji replied, not taking his eyes from the main data stream. "No significant deviations in the last 24 hours. The system remains stable." "Stable is a relative term, Doctor," Isla countered. "Ensure you double-check the structural integrity sensors." Jansen reported a harmonic vibration on the east pylon an hour ago. He called it a ghost in the machine. "I will cross-reference the seismographs with the pylon sensors," Kenji stated. "I suspect it is a result of the gyroscopic stabilizers compensating for a subsurface current." He found a logical explanation for everything. It was a professional necessity. "See that you do." Madsen out. The screen went blank. He isolated the pylon sensor data. Bao Jansen was the station's chief engineer, a man who treated the station less like a workplace and more like a temperamental living creature. His reports of ghosts were common. Kenji overlaid the data streams. There it was, a minute, almost imperceptible tremor lasting only a few seconds. He checked the subsurface sonar. Nothing. No current, no sea life. It was a vibration without a source. He made a note, flagging the event as an anomaly. He typed, "Source of harmonic vibration on east pylon undetermined. Further analysis required." He returned to the primary telemetry, preparing to send it to the commander. His gaze scanned the pressure gradient display, a swirling map of reds and blues. His eyes stopped. He leaned forward, the worn fabric of his chair groaning in the quiet. There, in a sector of the eyewall he had observed 1,000 times, was a pattern. A tiny flicker in the data, a pressure fluctuation so small it was almost within the margin of error. It spiked, dropped, and then spiked again in a perfect, repeating rhythm. 112. A pause. 112. Weather was chaos. It was the definition of chaos. It did not produce neat, repeating digital signals. He isolated the sensor feed from that specific sector. He pulled up the historical data. He filtered out the background noise, the immense, roaring data of the hurricane itself. And there it was, buried deep within the chaos. The signal had been there for weeks, maybe longer. A faint, rhythmic pulse hidden in the scream of the wind. It was impossible. It was a structured signal inside a system that should have no structure. Kenji stared at the clean, rhythmic line he had uncovered. The hum of the station seemed to fade. For the first time, the roar of the storm on the other side of the glass sounded less like wind and more like a whisper. Chapter 2. Static on the Line. The mess hall was sterile and brightly lit, smelling faintly of recycled air and nutrient paste. Kenji sat with a tablet, poking at a synthetic protein patty with a fork. He wasn't eating. The data from his console was mirrored on the tablet's screen, the pulsing red line a source of deep unease. Isla Madsen entered, her tray holding only a black coffee and a nutrient bar. She sat opposite him without an invitation. "You missed the morning briefing," she said. It was not an accusation, merely a statement of fact. "I was running diagnostics." Kenji slid the tablet across the table. "I need you to see this." Isla picked it up. She swiped through the data, her brow furrowed in concentration. She spent a full minute absorbing the information, her expression unreadable. Finally, she set the tablet down. "It's a sensor echo," she concluded, "or a feedback loop from the relay satellite. The pressure is too immense out there. The equipment is bound to produce artifacts." "I have run diagnostics on the entire array," Kenji insisted, his voice low. "The sensors are functioning perfectly. The signal is not an echo. It is clean. It originates from within the storm wall." "Originates?" Isla's gaze was sharp. "Doctor, you are assigning intent to a data anomaly. It is a machine ghost, nothing more. I want you to run a full spectral analysis on the sensor array. If you can't find the source of the malfunction, I will have Jansen pull the unit for a full hardware inspection." "Commander, with respect, this is not a malfunction." "Then find me another explanation," she said, her tone final. She stood, her meal untouched. "A real one. I need my chief meteorologist focused on the storm, not chasing phantoms in the code." Kenji watched her leave. He was being dismissed. He shoved his tray away and left the mess hall, his destination the communications hub at the station's core. The comms room was a small, dark space, illuminated only by the glow of monitors. Jenna O'Connell sat in the center of the web, a headset half on. She was young, with a nervous energy that she channeled into her work. Her job was to find a clear channel through the storm's electromagnetic interference, a task most days considered impossible. "Jenna," Kenji began, "can you help me with something?" She swiveled in her chair. "Dr. Tanaka, sure, what's up?" "I need to access the raw audio feed from the external atmospheric sensors. All of it. Unfiltered." Jenna frowned. "All of it. The raw feed is 99% white noise, a horrible screech. We use a dozen suppression filters just to make it usable. It would be—" "I understand," Kenji interrupted. "It is important." She shrugged and typed a series of commands. "Okay, routing raw audio from the eyewall sensors to this station. I'd turn the volume down if I were you." A deafening hiss filled the room, a sound like a high-pressure hose aimed directly at his eardrums. It was a physical presence, a wall of sound that made the air vibrate. "You said you get artifacts in the signal," Kenji said, raising his voice over the din. "All the time," Jenna shouted. "Sometimes in the static you get these patterns. Auditory pareidolia, Sophia calls it, the brain trying to make sense of noise. I hear stuff sometimes. Whispers, music. There's one I call the static choir. It's this low, humming sound. Almost sounds like voices. We filter it out, of course." Kenji's attention snapped to her. "The static choir, can you isolate it?" "I can try to isolate the frequency band, but it's usually buried." She worked her console, her fingers flying across the keys. The overwhelming hiss receded, replaced by a lower, more complex layer of sound. It was still noise, but it had a strange, dissonant harmony. It was the sound he imagined a swarm of insects the size of planets would make. Kenji pulled out his own tablet and synced it with the comm station. He brought up the visual representation of his pressure anomaly, the 112 pulse. "Now," he said, "keep the audio feed live." He watched the screen. The red line pulsed. At the exact same moment, a distinct rhythmic thrum rose above the dissonant hum of the static choir. Thrum, 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 a pause, thrum, 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 thrum. It was a perfect match. The pressure fluctuations he had discovered were not silent. They were the source of the sound. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a signal broadcast in two different forms simultaneously. Jenna stared, her mouth slightly open. "What is that?" Kenji didn't answer. He recorded a 5-minute loop of the raw, isolated audio. He left the comms hub, the dissonant hum of the static choir echoing in his mind. Later, alone in his small, quiet quarters, he played the recording. He closed his eyes and listened, forcing his mind to push past the noise. Underneath the layers of static, underneath the rhythmic thrum, he heard it. It was faint, indistinct, but it was there. A voice. 1,000 voices, whispering in a language he could not comprehend. Chapter 3: The Ozone Scent. A klaxon's shriek ripped Kenji from a shallow, restless sleep. Red emergency lights bathed his small room in a pulsing, urgent glow. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was the station-wide alert, a critical failure. "All personnel report to Central Command. This is not a drill." Isla's voice, strained and sharp, cut through the alarm. Kenji pulled on his jumpsuit and ran. The corridors were alive with the sound of running feet and the wail of the siren. He burst into the command center, a circular room with a panoramic view of the station and the storm beyond. The entire senior staff was already there. Bao Jansen stood before the main engineering console, his face pale. "Report," Isla demanded. "Massive energy surge," Bao said, his voice rough. "Direct lightning strike on the primary sensor array. The circuit breakers held, but the entire station grid is in flux. Life support is stable, but I have brownouts in hydroponics and the lower labs." As he spoke, a bolt of lightning, thicker and brighter than any Kenji had ever seen, arced from the storm wall and slammed into the station. The lights flickered violently. The hum of the station faltered, dropping in pitch for a terrifying second before the backup generators kicked in with a roar. Kenji stumbled, his hand flying to his head as a searing pain shot through his skull. The world went white. For a split second he saw not the command center but a shape, a vast, intricate geometric lattice of light and energy, impossibly complex. Then his vision cleared. A warm trickle ran from his nose. He wiped it with the back of his hand. It came away stained dark red. "Finch, report from hydroponics." Isla's voice cut through his disorientation. Dr. Corbin Finch's anxious face appeared on a side monitor. "Commander, the surge fried half my lamps, but that's not. There's something else. The Gen 4 Ivy. It's not growing toward the functioning lamps." "What are you talking about, Finch?" "It's growing toward the wall," Finch said, his voice a mix of confusion and fear. "Toward the main electrical conduit. And the leaves. They're changing. They look like copper." Before Isla could respond, Bao swore loudly. "What in God's name is that?" He was pointing at an external camera feed. The camera was aimed at the sensor array that had been struck. Clinging to the superheated metal was a branching, glassy structure. A fulgurite formed when lightning strikes sand or metal. But this one was different. It wasn't a random shape. It was intricate, almost biological in its structure, like a frozen nerve cluster. Kenji stared at the image of his nosebleed on his hand. The pain in his head slowly subsided, replaced by a strange, tingling numbness. The air in the command center was thick with a new smell. It was sharp, clean, and metallic. It was the smell of ozone, the scent of lightning. "Sophia," Isla said, turning to her medical officer, "are you seeing this?" Dr. Sophia Chavez, who had been quietly observing, moved toward Kenji. "Kenji, are you all right? You're bleeding." "I am fine," he said, though his voice sounded distant to his own ears. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a play. "The atmospheric pressure changes during a strike can cause capillary rupture," Sophia said, her voice calm and professional. She tilted his head forward. "Let me see." As she examined him, her professional calm wavered. Her eyes widened slightly. "Commander," she said, her voice losing its clinical edge, "you need to see this." Isla strode over. Kenji sat dazed as the two women stared at his neck. He couldn't see what they were seeing. He couldn't know that on the skin of his neck, just below his ear, was a faint, fern-like pattern of red and purple. A perfect, miniature Lichtenberg figure, as if a bolt of lightning had found a path through him, branding him from the inside out. The pattern was an almost exact, microscopic copy of the fulgurite clinging to the station's hull. Chapter 4: Fulgurite Men. The lockdown lasted for 12 hours. Bao Jansen managed to stabilize the power grid, but the station remained on high alert. The strange, nerve-like fulgurite still clung to the sensor array, a glassy monument to the storm's impossible power. Isla had forbidden any external activity until she could be sure the station was secure. It was Kenji who broke the silence. He had been at his console, ignoring Sophia's requests for a medical examination. He had been tracking the lightning. It was no longer random. The strikes were becoming more focused, more frequent, peppering the station's superstructure in a tight, deliberate pattern. "It's not trying to destroy us," Kenji murmured, his eyes wide. "It's building something." "Tanaka, that's enough," Isla said, her patience worn thin. "You are off duty until you are cleared by Dr. Chavez." "Commander, you have to listen," he pleaded. "The fulgurites, it's using the lightning to reshape the metal of the station." "Bow," Isla commanded, ignoring Kenji. "I need a full damage assessment. We can't wait any longer. Get your suit. I want a tethered walk. Visual inspection of all strike points on the dorsal hull." Bao nodded grimly. "Aye, Commander." He was a man who trusted his own eyes over any data stream. If there was damage, he would find it. 30 minutes later, Bao's helmet camera fed a live video to the main screen in the command center. The view was dizzying. The curved, metallic hull of Aegis Station gleamed in the perpetual daylight of the eye. Below, the water was a deep, placid blue. Above, the storm wall churned. Bao's heavy mag boots clanked as he moved across the hull, his tether a thin silver line connecting him to safety. "I'm approaching the primary sensor array," his voice crackled over the comm. "The fulgurite it's larger than I thought." He got closer. The structure was now a complex lattice of glassy, blackened metal, almost 6 feet tall. "What about the other strike points?" Isla asked. "Checking now." Bao moved along the hull, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. "Oh, hell!" His voice was a choked whisper. The camera swung around. Clinging to the hull were more of them. A dozen at least. Each one formed by a lightning strike, each one a grotesque fusion of metal and silica. And they were all vaguely humanoid in shape. They were like crude, glassy statues of men, hunched and twisted, their limbs fused to the station. "Commander, do you see this?" Bao breathed. "I see it, Bao. Document them and get inside." "Wait," Bao said. "One of them. It's different." He moved toward a figure perched near the main airlock. It was more defined than the others, with a clear head and 2 arms. "It looks like it's holding something." He reached out a gloved hand to touch it. In that instant, the figure moved. It was not a fluid motion. It was a horrible, jerky spasm, the shriek of metal scraping metal. The fulgurite man detached itself from the hull. Its glassy head swiveled, its featureless face turning toward Bao. It raised an arm, not of flesh, but of twisted rebar and melted plating. "Bao!" Isla screamed into the comm. Bao scrambled backward, losing his footing on the curved surface. He fell, his tether pulling taut with a sickening jolt. The fulgurite man took a step, its mag boots, once part of the station's hull, now its own, locking it to the surface. It was not alive. It was a puppet, animated by the station's own leaking electromagnetic field, driven by the will of the storm. "Get inside now," Isla yelled. Bao didn't need telling. He hauled himself along his tether, hand over hand, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The fulgurite man followed, its movements spidery and unnatural. It was slow, but it was relentless. Bao reached the airlock, slamming his palm against the external panel. The outer door hissed open. He threw himself inside, hitting the inner cycle button just as the creature's glassy hand scraped against the closing metal. Inside the command center, the crew watched in stunned silence. On the external camera, they saw the fulgurite man and its brethren. They were all moving now, crawling over the station's hull like grotesque insects, their sharp, glassy limbs scraping and clawing at the viewports and seals. Isla turned from the screen, her face ashen. The station was under attack by an enemy she could not comprehend. Her gaze fell on Kenji. He was not watching the screen with the rest of them. He was staring at his own console, at the swirling map of the storm. The lightning strikes were intensifying, a furious, targeted assault. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. There was no fear in them. There was only a terrifying, absolute certainty. "It's learning," he whispered. Chapter 5: The Conductor's Overture. The station was a prison. The low, rhythmic scraping of the fulgurite figures on the hull was a constant, nerve-shredding reminder of their predicament. No one could go outside. No one could risk even a minor breach. They were trapped. Isla convened an emergency meeting in the command center. Her voice was tight, controlled, but the strain showed in the lines around her eyes. "Jansen, damage report." "They're scraping at the seals on the primary viewports," Bao said, his voice hoarse. He had not spoken much since his EVA. "The polycarbonate will hold for now, but they're persistent. It's the electromagnetic field. They're drawn to the station's power conduits like moths to a flame. The more power we use, the more active they become." "So we go to minimal power," Isla decided. "Life support, essential systems only. Finch, shut down the main hydroponics lab. We'll survive on nutrient bars." "And communication?" Jenna O'Connell asked, her voice trembling. "We need the high-gain antenna to even have a chance of breaking through the storm." "We go silent," Isla commanded. "We give them no energy to feed on. We wait them out." "They will not stop." All eyes turned to Kenji. He stood by his console, looking unnervingly calm in the pulsing red emergency light. Sophia stood near him, as if ready to intervene. "This is not a random attack," Kenji continued, his voice steady. "The storm is a consciousness, an intelligence. This is its way of communicating. It is knocking at the door." "Dr. Tanaka, you are speaking nonsense," Isla snapped. "You are under extreme psychological distress." "Am I?" Kenji gestured to the main screen, where the glassy figures continued their mindless assault. "Is he under distress? Is the entire station hallucinating? This isn't madness, Commander. It is contact." "Contact with what? A hurricane?" "It is not a hurricane," Kenji said, his voice dropping, taking on a strange, resonant quality. "It is a mind so vast that its thoughts are weather systems. Its anger is a Category 5. We built our little bubble in the middle of its brain, and it has finally noticed us." As he spoke, a new alarm blared, high-pitched and frantic. "Airlock breach, Section Gamma 7, Bao yelled, pointing at a schematic. "One of them broke through an old maintenance hatch." Panic erupted. Gamma 7 was a storage corridor, but it was connected to the main station's spine. Isla drew the sidearm she wore holstered at her hip. "Cole, with me," she ordered her security officer. "Everyone else, seal the command center doors." But Kenji did not move toward the doors. He started walking toward the corridor leading to Gamma 7. "Kenji, no," Sophia cried out, reaching for him. He moved past her as if she were not there. He walked with a purpose they had never seen in him. He was no longer the quiet, meticulous scientist. He reached the corridor intersection. At the far end, shrouded in smoke and sparks from the ruptured conduit, stood a fulgurite man. It was taller than the others, its form less crude. It crackled with raw energy, the air around it shimmering. It took a jerky step forward. Isla raised her weapon. "Get back, Tanaka." Kenji ignored her. He kept walking toward the creature. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone. The hairs on his arms stood on end. He could feel the raw power emanating from the thing, a wild, untamed energy that vibrated in his bones. He stopped 20 feet from it. He did not run. He did not cower. He raised his right hand. The fulgurite man froze. The crackling energy around it seemed to intensify, arcing between its glassy fingers. Kenji felt a jolt, a current of pure information flooding his mind. It was not a thought. It was a torrent of raw sensation, the pressure of 1,000,000,000 tons of water, the fury of supersonic winds, the cold, silent darkness of the abyss. It was the storm's own self-awareness, and it was flowing through him. The Lichtenberg figure on his neck burned with a cold fire. He was a wire, he was a conduit, he was part of its circuit. With a final, deafening crack, the fulgurite man exploded. It did not just shatter. It disintegrated into 1,000,000 glittering shards of glass and a cloud of superheated dust. The corridor fell silent. Kenji swayed on his feet, his hand dropping to his side. He turned slowly to face the others. His nose was bleeding again, a dark stream cutting a path through the grime on his face. He looked at them, his eyes filled with a terrifying and profound understanding. Then he collapsed to the floor. The crew stared, frozen in a mixture of terror and awe. On the main view screen, the storm wall continued its silent, violent churn. But in the eye, for one impossible, suspended moment, the ever-present wind died completely. The surface of the water became a perfect, undisturbed mirror. The hum of the station was the only sound left in a world that had suddenly and completely gone silent. Chapter 6: The Weeping Ivy. Sophia Chavez worked under the harsh, sterile light of the infirmary. Kenji lay unconscious on the main diagnostic bed, his breathing shallow. A network of wires and sensors connected him to the medical monitors, which displayed a bewildering array of readings. His core temperature was low, his heart rate erratic, and his brainwave patterns were unlike anything Sophia had ever seen. They were chaotic, yet rhythmic, spiking in perfect time with the lightning that had once again begun to flash outside. Isla stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of grim resolve. "What is his condition, doctor?" "Physically, he is in a state of shock, but I can't explain the neurological data," Sophia said, her eyes fixed on the EEG display. "It's not a seizure, it's structured. It looks like he's processing a massive amount of information, more than a human mind is built to handle." She pointed to a faint scar forming on his hand. "He has electrical burns, Commander, not from an external source. They're coming from the inside out." Isla's gaze shifted from the monitor to Kenji's still form. She saw the faint, fern-like pattern on his neck, now darker and more pronounced. She had seen the impossible thing he had done in the corridor. She was a woman who believed in chain of command, in protocol, in the tangible world. Kenji was now an anomaly she could not categorize, a problem without a procedure. "Keep him sedated," Isla ordered. "I can't have him doing whatever that was again, not until I understand what we're dealing with." "I'm not sure the sedatives are having any effect," Sophia admitted quietly. "His metabolism is abnormal." A call came through on Isla's wristcom. It was Corbin Finch, his voice tight with a fresh layer of panic. "Commander, you need to get to hydroponics. Now." Isla left Sophia with Kenji and made her way to the hydroponics bay. The large, humid room was usually a vibrant green space, a welcome contrast to the station's sterile corridors. Now it was dim, lit only by emergency lighting. A thick, metallic smell, like rust and ozone, hung in the air. Corbin stood in the center of the room, his face pale. "Report Finch," Isla said, her hand resting on her sidearm. "It's the Ivy," Corbin whispered, pointing. "The Gen 4 copper-infused Ivy. It was an experiment, designed to absorb heavy metals from recycled water." Isla followed his finger. The lush green vines had turned a dark, sickly brown, streaked with shimmering veins of copper. They had pulled away from their dead UV lamps, crawling over the walls and floor, their tendrils wrapping around every power conduit and junction box in the room. They were no longer growing towards light. They were growing toward electricity. And they were weeping. A thick, viscous, coppery sap oozed from the leaves, dripping onto the floor with a soft, steady patter. "The power surge must have accelerated its primary function," Corbin stammered. "It's leaching the copper from the station's own wiring. But that's not the worst part." He led her to the main nutrient tank. The Ivy's root system had overwhelmed the vat, its coppery filaments creating a dense, fibrous knot. And in the center of the tank, suspended in the murky water, something was growing. It was a pod, a large, pulsating sac of translucent plant matter and woven copper threads. Inside, a shape was forming. It was vague, indistinct, but unmistakably humanoid. "It's building a body," Corbin said, his voice trembling. "Using the same principles as the fulgurite creatures. Plant matter, station metals, and a biological framework. It's been feeding on the station's power grid, growing itself." The rhythmic dripping of the sap was the only sound. Isla stared at the grotesque womb. The station wasn't just under attack from the outside. It was being eaten from the inside out, its own systems turned against it, its own life-giving flora becoming a cancerous growth. "Cut the power to this section," Isla said, her voice low and dangerous. All of it now. I can't, Bao Jansen's voice crackled over her calm. He had been listening from engineering. The vines have bypassed the manual breakers. They've tapped directly into a primary power trunk line. If I try to shut it down, the feedback could overload the entire station grid. We'd lose life support. The pod in the tank pulsed, a slow, steady beat that seemed to mock them. The shape within it had become more defined. It had a head. It had limbs. Isla raised her weapon, aiming it at the center of the pod. "Commander, do," Finch yelled. "We don't know what that will do. The sap is highly conductive if you rupture the sac." His warning was cut short as a tremor shook the entire station. A deep, groaning sound echoed through the hull. On a small monitor in the corner, a schematic of the station flashed an alert. "Hull breach imminent," Bao's voice screamed over the comm. "The scraping. They're through. Deck 4, observation lounge." Isla lowered her weapon, torn between the immediate threat and the growing horror in front of her. The dripping of the sap quickened. The pod pulsed faster. She made a choice. "Finch, seal this room. No one in or out. Jansen, try to reroute power. Do whatever you have to do." She ran from the room. The image of the thing in the tank burned into her mind. The station was fighting a war on two fronts, one against the mindless glass monsters outside, and one against the creeping, intelligent cancer within. She was beginning to realize they were not two different wars. They were one. Chapter 7: A Voice in the Dark. The observation lounge was a place of quiet contemplation, with a huge, curved viewport offering a panoramic vista of the storm. Now, it was a scene of destruction. A large, jagged hole had been torn in the polycarbonate, and a high-pitched scream of escaping air filled the room. Emergency shutters were halfway down, their descent blocked by the twisted form of a fulgurite man wedged in the opening. Two more of the creatures were inside, their glassy limbs scrabbling against the floor, their featureless heads turning towards the sound of approaching footsteps. Isla and Marcus Cole, the security officer, skidded to a halt at the corridor entrance. The air was thin, pulled towards the breach. "Cole's suppression foam," Isla yelled over the shriek. "Seal the breach." Marcus unslung the large canister from his back, aiming it at the hole. He fired. A thick, white foam erupted from the nozzle, instantly beginning to expand and harden as it hit the air. It covered the wedged fulgurite man, sealing the hole and silencing the terrible scream of escaping atmosphere. The two other creatures turned on them. They were faster than the first one Kenji had faced, their movements less jerky. They were adapting. One lunged at Marcus, who met it with a blast of foam, encasing its legs and torso, causing it to fall to the floor, still writhing. Isla aimed her sidearm at the second one. She fired 3 rounds into its center of mass. The bullets ricocheted off its glassy hide with a series of loud pings, doing nothing. It swiped at her with an arm made of sharpened conduit. She ducked, the metal claws scraping sparks from the wall behind her head. This was a losing fight. Their weapons were useless. Suddenly, the station's intercom crackled to life. It wasn't Isla's voice, or Bao's, or Jenna's. It was a voice that was both one and many, a chorus of whispers speaking in perfect unison. It was Kenji. "It is not alive," the voice echoed through the station, calm and resonant. It was coming from Kenji's own throat in the infirmary, but it was being broadcast everywhere. "It has no brain, it has no nerves, it is a puppet. You are fighting the strings, not the puppeteer." The fulgurite man paused its attack on Isla, its head tilting as if listening to a sound she could not hear. "The strings are electromagnetic," Kenji's voice continued, a calm lecture in the middle of chaos. "Its muscles are motors of mismatched polarity. You cannot break it, you must unplug it." "What the hell does that mean?" Marcus grunted, struggling to keep the half-foamed creature on the floor pinned. "The conduits," Isla realized aloud. She looked at the creature in front of her. Its body was a mesh of station plating, wiring, and glass. But running through its core like a spine was a thick, insulated power cable, ripped from the station's walls. "Coal the foam. Aim for the main cable on its chest." Marcus twisted, re-aiming his nozzle. He fired another blast. The foam hit the fulgurite man square in the chest, engulfing the power cable. The creature began to twitch violently, its limbs spasming. Arcs of blue energy crackled over its body as its power source was shorted out by the conductive foam. With a final, violent shudder, it collapsed, inert. The lounge fell silent, save for their heavy breathing. The two defeated creatures lay like discarded sculptures. Isla stood, her heart pounding. She looked towards the infirmary. Kenji had saved them. He was no longer just a man. He was becoming an interface, a translator for an alien intelligence. And she had no idea if that made him their savior or the instrument of their destruction. Back in the infirmary, Sophia stared in horrified fascination. Kenji was sitting upright on the diagnostic bed, his eyes open but unfocused, a thin trickle of blood running from his nose. The words had come from him, but his expression was vacant, his body a mere vessel for the voice that had spoken. As Isla and Marcus secured the lounge, Kenji's eyes suddenly focused on Sophia. He saw her. The chorus of voices was gone, replaced by his own, weak and hoarse. "Sophia," he rasped. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "The water, it's the water. It's been changing us all along." He was looking at the small dispenser in the corner of the room. The station's water reclamation system was perfect, a closed loop that could recycle any liquid into potable water. It could filter out any biological or chemical impurity. But it could not filter out a memory. It could not filter out a thought. The storm mind was not just in the air and the electricity. They had been drinking it for 3 years. Every cell in their bodies was already saturated with it. Kenji's transformation wasn't an anomaly. He was just the first to awaken. Chapter 8: The Glass-Eyed Gulls. The next 48 hours passed in a state of tense, suffocating quiet. Isla had imposed a strict lockdown and power rationing. The crew moved through the dim corridors like ghosts, speaking in hushed tones. The fulgurite figures remained motionless on the hull, their energy source cut off. But they were still there, waiting. In the hydroponics bay, the monstrous pod continued to grow, drawing its energy from a source they could not sever. Isla had quarantined Kenji in the infirmary. He was lucid now, but changed. A deep calm had settled over him, the frantic scientist replaced by something more ancient and weary. He no longer spouted frantic theories. He stated facts about the storm as if reading from a textbook. "It doesn't want to kill us," he explained to Isla through the infirmary's reinforced glass. "It's curious. Imagine being alone for 1,000,000 years and then a flea builds a house on your skin. You wouldn't crush it. You would watch it. You would poke it. You might even try to talk to it." "It's a peculiar way of talking," Isla retorted, gesturing towards the sealed observation lounge. "It doesn't understand pain," Kenji said simply, "or life or death. These are alien concepts. It only understands energy, pressure, and patterns. It is trying to replicate the patterns it sees in us, the Fulgurite men. They are its first, clumsy attempts at sculpture. The thing in the tank is its attempt at biology." "And what about you, Kenji? What are you an attempt at?" Kenji looked at his own hands, turning them over slowly. "A telephone." Isla left him, her unease deeper than ever. She needed a moment of air that wasn't recycled, a view that wasn't a monitor. She went to the uppermost deck, a small, open-air platform at the station's highest point, protected from the elements by a powerful atmospheric shield. It was the only place one could feel the wind of the eye. She stepped out. The air was cool and clean. The sun was bright in the impossibly blue sky. The platform was surrounded by a safety rail, and perched on that rail, as they always were the gulls. A dozen of them. They had been trapped in the eye when the storm formed and had become the station's unofficial mascots. But they were different now. Normally they would squawk and take flight at her approach. Today they did not move. They stood silent, perfectly still, their heads cocked at the same unnatural angle. They were all facing the swirling wall of the storm. Isla took a cautious step closer. The birds did not react. They seemed less like living creatures and more like taxidermy. She got close enough to see their eyes. They were no longer the dark, beady eyes of a seagull. They were milky and opaque, with a strange, crystalline structure. They looked like orbs of sea glass, and in their depths she could see a perfect miniature reflection of the churning storm wall, swirling in time with the real thing. One of the gulls opened its beak. It did not make a sound. Instead, a low, resonant hum came from its throat, the same dissonant hum of the static choir Kenji had isolated in the comms room. Another gull joined in, then another, until all 12 were humming in a perfect, terrifying chorus. It was a sound that vibrated in her bones, a sound that felt ancient and wrong. Isla backed away slowly, her heart pounding. The birds had been here the whole time, watching, listening. They were not just mascots, they were nodes, living sensors, their simple minds and bodies co-opted by the storm mind. They were another channel of communication. The humming stopped. In perfect unison, the 12 gulls turned their heads, their glass-like eyes, each one reflecting a universe of chaos, fixed on her. Then, one by one, they spread their wings and launched themselves from the railing. But they did not fly up. They dove straight down into the placid, deep blue water of the eye. They hit the surface and vanished without a splash, as if the water were not there at all. Isla stood alone on the platform, the silence more terrifying than the humming had been. She looked down at the water. It was calm, still. but she had the distinct impression that something was looking back up at her from the abyssal depths. The gulls had not committed suicide. They had been recalled. They had gone to deliver their report. Chapter 9. The Subterranean Visitors. The station's sonar was an instrument of peace of mind. It constantly mapped the water below them, confirming the depth, noting the occasional large fish, and assuring the crew that the space beneath Aegis was as empty and non-threatening as the sky above. That peace was shattered by Bao Jansen. "Commander, you'd better get to the command center." His voice crackled over Isla's comm, laced with a new kind of disbelief. "You're not going to believe the sonar reading." Isla found Bao and Jenna staring at the main sonar screen. It displayed a 3D topographic map of the water column beneath the station. A massive object was ascending from the depths. It was enormous, at least 5 times the size of the Aegis itself, and its shape was smooth, geometric, and completely unnatural. It was not a whale or a geological formation. It was a vessel. "Is it military? Russian? Chinese?" Isla demanded, her mind racing through geopolitical possibilities. "No, Commander," Jenna said, her voice barely a whisper. She pointed to a secondary reading on the screen. "The acoustic signature. There's no engine noise, no cavitation from propellers. It's moving at 30 knots in complete silence. And the material, the sonar isn't bouncing off it properly. It's being absorbed. It's like trying to get an echo off a shadow." They watched, transfixed, as the object ascended. It stopped 100 meters below the surface, a colossal, silent presence hanging in the water directly beneath them. For several minutes, nothing happened. The station felt fragile, a tiny, flimsy shell floating above a leviathan. Then a new contact appeared. It detached from the larger object and rose swiftly towards the surface. It was smaller, but still bigger than a commercial submarine. "It's going to surface," Bao stated, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. Isla made a decision. "Jenna, open a broad-spectrum hailing frequency, audio and visual. Let's see who our new neighbors are." "Aye, Commander." The new vessel breached the surface of the eye. It rose from the water with an impossible grace, shedding water like a black, polished stone. It was long and slender, with no visible seams, windows, or hatches. It looked less like a machine and more like something that had been grown. A powerful light emanated from its tip, cutting through the daylight and fixing on Aegis Station. Jenna's screen flared. "Receiving a signal, Commander. It's not a radio wave, it's complex. Looks like a direct neural interface signal. It's trying to connect to our systems." Before Isla could give an order, a new voice spoke over the station's intercom. It was not Kenji's chorus of whispers. This voice was clear, calm, and sexless, with an underlying resonant hum, like a cello string being played in a vast, empty hall. "Your existence here is a disruption," the voice stated, not as a threat but as a simple declaration of fact. "You pollute the conversation." On the main view screen, a section of the black vessel's hull seemed to dissolve, opening like an iris. 3 figures emerged, stepping out onto the deck. They were tall and impossibly thin, their long limbs moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Their bodies were encased in a dark, wet-looking exoskeleton that shimmered with faint, bioluminescent patterns. They had no discernible faces, only smooth, helmet-like heads that tilted towards the Aegis. "Who is this?" Isla demanded, speaking to the empty air. "Identify yourselves." "We are the emissaries," the voice replied. "We are the deep. This space you occupy is holy ground. It is a place of communion. The mind above speaks with the pressure below. You are an irritation in its thoughts." In the infirmary, Kenji sat up, his eyes wide. He was hearing it too. "They're not talking to us," he whispered to Sophia. "They're talking to the storm." "The mind above," Sophia breathed, connecting the dots. On the black vessel's deck, one of the emissaries raised a long, three-fingered hand. The water around the vessel began to churn. The echoplankton that Kenji had once observed started to glow with incredible intensity, rising to the surface and arranging themselves into impossibly complex shifting patterns. They were pictograms, star charts, equations that made Kenji's head spin. "It sleeps now," the voice on the intercom explained as if to a child. "It has slept for 1,000 of your years since the last sky fire burned its thoughts. Its slumber is a cage for itself and for what it keeps at bay. This storm is its dream of peace. Your sharp metal noises and your bright, angry lights are waking it." "What are you talking about?" Isla's voice was firm, betraying none of her shock. "What is this communion?" "The mind above sings a song of energy. The pressure below sings a song of gravity. We exist in the harmony between them. We are the keepers of the lullaby. Your presence creates dissonance, a sharp note in the chord." The emissary lowered its hand. The glowing plankton submerged, and the water grew dark again. "We will not harm you," the voice continued. "You are insignificant, but you must leave. We have been patient. Our patience is ending. Deconstruct this irritation. Return to your shallow lands. Do not wake the dreamer." The iris on the black vessel closed. The vessel itself, with the three emissaries standing on its deck, began to sink back into the placid water of the eye. It descended without a sound, leaving no wake, and vanished from the sonar screens. The colossal shadow below it descended as well, retreating back into the abyssal darkness from which it had come. The crew of Aegis Station was left in stunned silence. They were not alone. They were trespassing. They were ants on a drum, and their frantic scurrying was about to awaken the drummer. Chapter 10: Pattern Sickness. The visit from the emissaries shattered the crew's morale. The threat was no longer abstract. It had a voice and a face, albeit an alien one. They were not scientists in a lab. They were trespassers on holy ground. Isla Madsen felt control slipping through her fingers. Her crew was looking at her for answers, and for the first time she had none. The worst affected was Jenna O'Connell. Her job was to find signals in noise, patterns in chaos. The emissary's signal, the complexity of the plankton language, the sheer information density of the encounter, it had broken something in her. She began seeing patterns everywhere. In the condensation on a viewport, in the arrangement of nutrient bars on a shelf, in the static between comm channels. She would spend hours at her console, not attempting to communicate, but just listening, her head cocked, a frantic, obsessed look in her eyes. "It's all connected," she would whisper to anyone who came near. "The storm's rotation speed is a prime number. The number of fulgurite creatures corresponds to a Fibonacci sequence. It's all a message, a single, gigantic message." Sophia diagnosed it as an acute psychological break brought on by extreme stress. She called it pattern sickness, but Kenji knew better. "She's not broken," he told Sophia from his infirmary room. "She's just not the right kind of antenna. I can filter the signal. I can make sense of the core message. She's getting all of it all at once. The raw data stream, it's too much." Jenna's condition worsened. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She covered the walls of the comms room with printouts of wave forms and charts of pressure gradients, drawing frantic lines between them with a red marker, creating a vast, incomprehensible web. "Don't you see?" she asked a horrified Marcus Cole, pointing to a swirl of static that looked vaguely like a spiral galaxy. "It's not just the storm. The storm is the local server. It's connected to everything. The whole universe is a single calculation, and we're a rounding error." Isla, against Sophia's medical advice, confronted Jenna in the comms hub. The room was a chaotic nest of paper and scrawled equations. "Jenna, you need to rest," Isla said, her voice gentle. Jenna spun around, her eyes wild. "Rest? How can I rest? They're about to solve the equation, Commander. They're about to balance the books, and we're on the wrong side of the ledger." She grabbed a printout and shoved it into Isla's hands. It was a complex fractal, a pattern that seemed to repeat endlessly inward. "This is its mind," Jenna hissed. "This is what it thinks, and look." She pointed to a tiny, jarring imperfection in the geometric perfection, a single pixel that was out of place. "That's us. That's Aegis Station, an error, a glitch in the system, and the system is about to run a debug sequence." Suddenly, Jenna went silent. She tilted her head as if listening to a distant sound. Her eyes went wide with a sudden, profound terror. "Oh no," she whispered. "The lullaby, it stopped." At that exact moment, an alarm blared through the station. It wasn't a breach. It wasn't a power failure. It was a proximity alert from the sonar array, an alert that had never gone off before. On the main screen in the command center, the sonar map showed 1,000 contacts ascending from the deep. Not one vessel, but a fleet. They were the same shape as the emissary's ship, but smaller, much smaller. They were rising from the abyssal plain, a silent, black swarm moving towards the station. The emissary's patience had ended. They were done asking. They were coming to remove the irritation themselves. Chapter 11, The Harvest. Isla stood in the command center, the red alert light washing over her face. "Defensive posture," she commanded, her voice steady despite the dread coiling in her gut. "Cole, I want security teams at all primary airlocks. Jansen, give me a damage control report on the hull's integrity now." "The hull is stable, Commander," Bao responded from the engineering pit, his voice tight. "But it wasn't designed for whatever this is. If they can phase through water like it isn't there, they can probably phase through reinforced steel." On the sonar, the swarm of black vessels stopped 100 meters below the station. They arranged themselves in a perfect circular formation around the Aegis, a silent, underwater blockade. "What are they doing?" Marcus asked, his hand on his sidearm. "They're just sitting there." Kenji's voice came over the comm from the infirmary, calm and clear. "They are not preparing to attack. They are preparing for a harvest." "A harvest of what?" Isla shot back. "The pod in hydroponics," Kenji stated. "It's ripe." As if on cue, a new alarm screamed. It was from the sealed hydroponics bay. Corbin Finch's panicked face appeared on the monitor. "Commander, the pod, it's hatching." The camera feed from inside the bay showed the pulsating sac splitting open. A thick, coppery fluid spilled out. A figure, slick and glistening, uncurled itself. It was humanoid, its body a disturbing fusion of pale plant matter and shimmering copper wire. Its head was smooth and featureless like the emissary's, but its form was a crude, horrifying mimicry of a human being. It stood on unsteady legs, steam rising from its body. "It's a golem," Bao whispered from the pit, "made of our own damn ship." The golem took a step, then another. It ignored the cameras, ignored the sealed door. It walked directly to the outer wall of the hydroponics bay, the wall that faced the sea. It placed its hands on the metal. The copper wiring in its body began to glow with an intense, white-hot light. The station's steel hull sizzled and melted like wax under its touch. "It's cutting its way out," Finch screamed. Isla knew she couldn't let that thing outside. There was no telling what it was capable of. "Jansen, can you electrify that section of the hull?" "I can try." Bao's fingers flew across his console, rerouting emergency power. The golem shrieked, a sound like grinding metal and tearing vegetation, as a massive electrical charge surged through the hull. It was thrown backward, its body convulsing. But it wasn't destroyed. The electricity seemed to feed it. It writhed on the floor, its copper veins glowing brighter, its form growing larger, more stable. "It's absorbing the energy," Bao yelled in disbelief. "Stop," Kenji's voice commanded over the comm. "You are only making it stronger." The golem recovered. It rose, taller and more defined than before. It turned its blank face towards the sealed door of the bay as if it could see the crew on the other side. Then it walked back to the hole it had started to melt in the hull. It continued its work, the metal melting away before its touch. On the sonar display, one of the smaller black vessels detached from the blockade and began to rise. It was heading directly for the hydroponics bay. "They're coming to collect it," Isla realized. This was not an invasion. It was a retrieval. The Storm Mind had used their technology to create a new form of life, a hybrid being of organic matter and terrestrial technology, and the deep was coming to claim it. The golem finished its work. A large, circular section of the hull peeled away and dropped into the sea. Ocean water surged into the hydroponics bay, flooding the room. The golem stood in the torrent, unmoving. Outside, the small, black submarine surfaced. An iris opened on its side. The golem turned and walked out of the station, wading through the flooded bay and into the waiting vessel. As soon as it was aboard, the iris closed. The submarine submerged and rejoined the silent fleet below. The alarm for the hull breach blared. Seawater was flooding the entire lower deck of the station. "Seal it off," Isla ordered. "Section 4 is lost. Close the pressure doors now." The crew watched in stunned silence as the fleet of black vessels, their prize secured, turned in unison and descended back into the crushing darkness of the abyss. They had taken what they came for. Aegis Station was crippled. A massive, gaping hole was torn in its side. An entire section was flooded and lost, and they were left with the terrifying knowledge that they had been used as an incubator, a factory for a purpose they could not begin to comprehend. They were no longer just observers. They were now a contaminated resource. Chapter 12: The Inverse Shadow. The station was wounded. The constant, desperate work of damage control replaced the suffocating quiet. Bao Jansen and his engineering team worked tirelessly, sealing the flooded section and rerouting critical systems around the gaping hole in their hull. The station was smaller now, its corridors tighter, the sense of isolation more acute. The loss of the hydroponics bay meant their food supply was now finite. The clock was ticking. Isla had moved Kenji from the infirmary to a sealed observation room adjoining the command center. He was too valuable and too dangerous to be left isolated. He sat in the room for hours, staring at the storm wall, his expression serene. He was their interpreter, their oracle, and their most terrifying liability. The true psychological toll of the recent events began to manifest in stranger ways. The crew, deprived of natural light in the sealed-off sections, began to suffer from a profound sensory distortion. It started with small things. Marcus Cole swore a corridor seemed to stretch on for miles, only to turn around and see it was its normal length. Sofia Chavez poured herself a coffee that tasted of salt, then poured another from the same pot that was perfectly normal. The strangest phenomenon began to center around Bao Jansen. He was working in a dimly lit service junction, trying to splice a power cable, when he first noticed it. His shadow, cast by his helmet lamp, was not behaving correctly. It was darker than it should be, a pool of absolute blackness that seemed to suck the light from the air. He reached for a tool, and his shadow on the wall mimicked the movement but with a slight, almost imperceptible delay. He froze, then moved his hand again quickly. The shadow hand lagged behind, as if it were a separate entity reluctantly following his lead. He dismissed it as exhaustion, a trick of the mind in the flickering light, but it happened again. In the engineering pit under the harsh glare of the main console, he saw that his shadow was pale. It was a flickering, shimmering outline of himself, a space on the floor that was brighter than the surrounding area. An inverse shadow. He told no one. He was a man of logic and mechanics. He didn't believe in ghosts or omens, but fear began to gnaw at him. He started avoiding bright lights, preferring to work in the dimmest corners of the station. The phenomenon culminated one night cycle as he walked down a deserted corridor. The only light was a single emergency lamp at the far end, casting a long, stretched shadow before him. He stopped, his blood running cold. His shadow had stopped a few feet behind him. It stood there, a tall, dark silhouette, disconnected from his feet. He took a tentative step backward. The shadow remained still. He took a step forward. The shadow took a step toward him. Panic seized him. He broke into a run, his heavy boots echoing in the silent corridor. He didn't dare look back. He sprinted towards the relative safety of the command center. He burst through the door, breathless, his heart hammering. Isla and Sophia looked up, startled. "Bao, what is it?" Isla demanded. He couldn't speak, he just pointed back down the corridor. Isla and Sophia peered past him. The corridor was empty, his shadow was gone. "The storm mind doesn't just manipulate energy," Kenji's voice said calmly from the observation room. He had been watching. "It manipulates information. Light is information. A shadow is just a lack of information. It's rewriting the code. It's playing with the fundamental laws of reality inside the station." Bao stared at the floor where his feet were. There was nothing, no shadow at all. He felt a profound sense of violation, as if a part of himself had been amputated. He looked up at Kenji, his face a mask of terror. "What does it want from me?" he whispered. "You are the station's heart," Kenji replied, his eyes filled with a strange pity. "You keep its blood pumping. The storm is curious about how you work." That night Bao couldn't sleep. He sat in his small, dark quarters watching the door. He had the terrible, unshakable feeling that his shadow was out there somewhere in the station, moving on its own, a dark, silent duplicate of himself, learning to be independent. And he feared what would happen when it decided to come back for him. Chapter 13: The Outsider's Signal. Jenna O'Connell was a ghost. She haunted the corridors, her eyes vacant, muttering to herself about prime numbers and fractal equations. Sophia had tried to treat her, but her mind was lost in a sea of cosmic data she could not process. Isla had assigned Marcus to watch her, to make sure she didn't harm herself or anyone else. The station's isolation was now absolute. The encounter with the emissaries had made one thing clear: no rescue was coming. The world outside either didn't know their plight or was powerless to intervene. They were on their own. Their only hope was to re-establish communication, to send a distress call so powerful it could pierce the storm's electromagnetic shroud. It was a desperate, foolish hope, but it was the only one they had left. Isla tasked a reluctant Bao with a high-risk plan: to perform a tethered EVA to the damaged high-gain antenna and manually realign it. "It's suicide, Commander," Bao stated flatly. "The fulgurite things are still out there. They're dormant, but if I start using power tools—" "We go dark," Isla countered. "We power down the entire station except for your suit and the comms link. A single, isolated power source. It's our only chance." The plan was set. The station was plunged into an eerie darkness, powered only by minimal emergency lights. Bao, clad in a heavy EVA suit, stood in the airlock, the scraping sounds of the dormant fulgurite figures audible through the hull. "I'm outside," he reported, his voice tight. He moved across the hull, his mag boots clamping him to the surface. The glassy, man-shaped figures were all around him, motionless statues in the perpetual daylight. He avoided looking at them, focusing only on the twisted wreck of the antenna array. Inside, in the command center, Jenna O'Connell began to stir. The station-wide power-down had somehow quieted the storm of data in her mind. For the first time in weeks, A flicker of her old self returned. She stumbled to the comms station, where Isla was monitoring Bao's progress. "The noise, it's different," Jenna whispered, her fingers finding their way to the controls out of muscle memory. "When the station is silent, there's something else, something underneath." "Jenna, get away from there," Isla ordered. But Jenna was already working, her movements suddenly lucid and precise. She bypassed the standard filters, diving deep into the raw radio spectrum. "There," she breathed. "It's been there the whole time, buried under our own transmission noise." She routed the audio to the main speakers. It was not the dissonant chorus of the storm mind. It was a clear, repeating signal, a three-note melody followed by a complex burst of digital information. It was structured, intelligent, and completely alien. "It's not coming from the storm," Jenna said, her eyes wide with revelation. "It's coming from outside, from deep space. It's being broadcast at the storm." On the hull, Bao had reached the antenna. "I'm starting the realignment," he said, his voice tense. He raised a power wrench. "Wait," Kenji's voice commanded from his room. He had been listening, silent until now. "The emissaries. They said the storm was a lullaby, a song to keep the dreamer asleep." "What about it?" Isla demanded. "That signal," Kenji said, a new urgency in his voice. "That's the lullaby. It's not from Earth. Someone or something put this storm here for a reason. They're broadcasting that signal to keep it stable, to keep it asleep." Jenna's fingers flew across her console, decoding the digital burst within the alien signal. The screen filled with non-terrestrial language, but also with universal constants. Star maps, atomic weights, a Rosetta Stone from the stars. "It's a warning," Jenna whispered, her face ashen. "It's a containment protocol. The message keeps repeating. Do not reply, do not amplify, do not wake the sleeper." Outside, Bao, unaware of the revelation, touched his power wrench to the antenna. The tool whirred to life. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The dormant fulgurite figures all spasmed at once. Their glassy eyes glowed with a malevolent red light. But they didn't attack Bao. They ignored him completely. They all turned their heads in unison, looking up at the high-gain antenna. The antenna, now powered, acted as an enormous amplifier. It took the faint, alien lullaby from deep space and broadcast it with immense power, inward, directly into the heart of the storm mind. It was like shouting into the ear of a sleeping giant. The storm wall, for 3 years a constant, churning mass, began to boil. The color shifted from gray to a bruised, sickening purple. The wind in the eye began to pick up, whipping the placid water into a froth. The entire station groaned as the barometric pressure began to drop precipitously. On the hull, Bao was thrown from his feet as the station bucked. The fulgurite creatures began to crawl, not towards him, but towards the antenna, drawn to the amplified signal. In the command center, Jenna screamed, clutching her head. "We woke it up, we woke it up." The alien lullaby was drowned out by a new sound coming over the comms, a sound from the heart of the storm itself. It was a low, guttural, planet-sized roar of pure, abyssal rage. The dreamer was awake, and it was furious. Chapter 14. The dreamer's wrath. The rage of the awakened storm mind was a physical force. Aegis Station, once a secure bubble, was now a toy in a bathtub. The calm eye of the storm collapsed. 60-foot waves born from nowhere crashed against the viewports. The sky, once a serene blue, turned into a black, swirling vortex. The wind shrieked, a sound of pure, cosmic fury. "Bow, get inside," Isla screamed into the calm. My tether snapped. "I'm untethered." Bow's terrified voice was barely audible over the roar. On the external camera, they saw him clinging desperately to a service ladder as the station pitched violently. The fulgurite creatures were being torn from the hull by the hurricane-force winds, shattering against the storm wall like glass bottles. Inside the station was chaos. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and the structure groaned under the impossible stress. Pressure drop is critical, hull integrity failing in multiple sections. Marcus yelled, trying to hold onto a console. Jenna lay curled in a ball on the floor, weeping and muttering. The eye is closing. The dream is over. Only Kenji was calm. He stood in his observation room, his hands pressed against the polycarbonate, looking out at the apocalyptic fury. He was not afraid. He was enraptured. "It's beautiful," he whispered. The information flooding his mind was no longer a whisper, it was a psychic scream. He saw what the storm was. It wasn't a mind, it was a cage. A cage made of energy and weather, crafted by the unknown aliens who sent the lullaby. And the creature inside the dreamer was something far older and far more terrible. It had been imprisoned on Earth for millennia, sleeping and dreaming. The station had been the key, and they had just turned it in the lock. A massive wave, a mountain of black water, slammed into the station, rolling it on its side. The crew was thrown across the command center. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The main lights died, plunging them into a terrifying, pitching darkness lit only by the frantic strobing of emergency lights and the hellish purple lightning outside. Isla found herself pinned under a fallen support beam, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The pain was immense, but her training took over. "Status report," she gasped. No one answered. Then a new sound cut through the chaos. It was the tearing of metal, a deep, grinding shriek that came from the station's core. A section of the ceiling ripped open, and something descended into the command center. It was not a fulgurite man. It was not the golem. It was a being of pure storm, a vaguely humanoid shape made of swirling black cloud crackling with purple lightning. It had no face, only two burning points of light like malevolent stars. It was a direct avatar of the dreamer, a piece of its rage given form. It drifted silently through the wrecked room, ignoring the panicked, injured crew. It seemed to be looking for something. Its burning eyes swept over Isla, over Marcus, over Jenna. It was scanning them. Its gaze settled on Kenji's observation room. The reinforced glass, designed to withstand immense pressure, frosted over and then shattered into dust. Kenji stood before the avatar, unafraid. He looked at the creature of living storm, and it looked back at him. It raised an arm made of wind and lightning. "Kenji!" Isla screamed, struggling to free herself. The Avatar's hand touched Kenji's forehead. Kenji did not scream. His body arched, his back lifting off the floor. Every vein in his body lit up with a brilliant, purple light. His nervous system transformed into a living circuit board of cosmic energy. The Lichtenberg figure on his neck burned itself through his jumpsuit. His eyes glowed with the same terrifying light as the Avatar's. He was no longer a telephone. He had become a receiver. The full, undiluted consciousness of the awakened dreamer poured into his mind. The history of the universe, the birth and death of stars, the secrets of the prison built to hold it, it all flooded into his fragile human brain. Then the light faded. The Avatar dissipated into a wisp of black smoke. Kenji crumpled to the floor, his body smoking, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at a truth no human was ever meant to see. The station gave a final, shuddering groan and began its final descent. It was no longer floating. It was sinking into the black, furious heart of the storm it had awakened. Chapter 15. The Human Fulgurite. The descent was surprisingly gentle. After the initial chaotic fury, the station stopped sinking and achieved a strange, deathly buoyancy. It was no longer on the surface. It was suspended deep within the storm wall, a bubble of failing technology adrift in a sea of pure energy and rage. The shrieking wind was gone, replaced by a deep, vibrating hum that was both sound and pressure. Outside the few remaining intact viewports, there was no water, no sky, only a thick purple-black miasma, periodically illuminated by silent, internal flashes of lightning. Isla managed to pull her leg free from the wreckage. The pain was blinding, a clean break below the knee, but adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. The command center was a tomb. Marcus Cole lay motionless, his neck at an impossible angle. Jenna O'Connell was gone, likely pulled into the storm when the main viewport shattered. Sophia was alive, pinned but conscious, trying to put pressure on a deep gash in her side. "Commander," Sophia gasped, her face pale, "we're inside it." "I know," Isla said, crawling toward her. "Save your strength." She ripped a strip of fabric from a uniform on a fallen crewman and began fashioning a crude tourniquet for Sophia's wound. Survival. That was all that was left. At the far end of the wrecked room, Kenji began to stir. He pushed himself to a sitting position, his movements stiff and awkward, like a puppet learning to use its strings. His eyes, no longer vacant, held a terrifying clarity. They glowed with a faint, residual purple light. "It is disappointed," Kenji said, his voice a dry, rasping echo of what it once was. It was his own voice now, but layered with the immensity of what he had witnessed. It expected more. It has been caged for eons by a race that understood the laws of the universe. We are children who found their parents' firearm. We have no idea what we have done. He stood swaying. His skin had taken on a strange, translucent quality, the network of purple veins beneath the surface clearly visible. The lullaby is broken. The cage is failing. When it breaks free of this atmospheric prison, it will not just destroy our world. It will unmake it, erase it from existence like a line of faulty code. "Is there any way to stop it?" Isla asked, tying off the tourniquet on Sophia's leg. She was speaking to her meteorologist, but she knew she was asking the universe's oldest prisoner for a solution. "The cage must be reinforced," Kenji stated. "The lullaby must be sung again, but there is no one left to sing it." He looked at the wreckage of the command center, at the dead and dying. "No one but us." He began to walk, his steps unsteady but purposeful, toward the engineering pit where Bao's console once stood. The station's power core, the signal from the antenna. We amplified the lullaby and woke it up. Perhaps, if we reverse the polarity, we can create a focused, nullifying pulse, a shout of silence to force it back into slumber. Sophia coughed, a spray of blood dotting her lips. "Kenji, that would take more power than the station has. You'd have to vent the entire core at once. The feedback." "I know," Kenji said, not looking back. "It will destroy the station and everyone in it." Isla looked at Sophia, whose breathing was becoming shallower. She looked at the dead faces of her crew. She looked at the swirling chaos outside. Her mission had always been the safety of her crew, the integrity of the station. Both were already lost. A new mission presented itself, one of staggering, impossible weight, the safety of the world. "Do it," Isla said, her voice clear and strong. Kenji reached the shattered remains of the engineering console. He placed his hands on the twisted metal. The purple veins in his arms pulsed with light, and the dead console flickered to life. Screens lit up, displaying schematics and power levels that were not coming from the station's computers, but directly from his mind. He was no longer just an interface. He was a component. He was hardwired into the station's dying soul. "I am rerouting the primary power conduits," he announced to the empty room. "Bypassing all safety protocols. The core containment field will destabilize in 90 seconds. He began to work, his movements becoming more fluid, more certain. He was not a man operating a machine. He and the station were one, a single entity working towards a final, suicidal purpose. "Isla," he said, his voice softening, the immense weight of the cosmos receding for a moment, leaving only the man she once knew. "It showed me everything. The ones who built the cage, they're not coming back. They lost a war 1,000,000 years ago. This was their final act. A final, desperate attempt to quarantine a weapon they could not control. They sacrificed their own galaxy to keep it here." A profound, chilling silence fell over the command center. They were not just fighting a monster. They were the last, unwitting guardians at the gates of hell itself. 40 seconds, Kenji said, his own voice returning to a monotone. "The energy matrix is unstable, but it is beautiful." Outside, the dreamer seemed to sense what was happening. The purple miasma began to churn faster. A colossal, shadowy shape formed in the chaos, a face the size of a mountain, its features a vortex of pure rage. It was coming for them. "Isla," Sophia whispered, her eyes fluttering. "I don't want to die in the dark." Isla crawled over to her, taking her hand. "We won't," she promised. Kenji turned from the console. His work was done. He walked to the center of the room, standing directly beneath the hole in the ceiling, looking up into the face of the approaching god monster. 10 seconds, he said. He raised his arms, embracing his fate. The lullaby ends. In 9. The station groaned. the metal beginning to glow red from the uncontained energy of the core. 8. A tendril of pure storm, a whip of black energy, lashed down from the face above, striking Kenji in the chest. 7. He did not scream. He arched his back, his body becoming a conduit for an impossible amount of energy. The station's entire power grid, the raw, furious heart of its fusion core, surged into him. 6. His skin cracked, revealing a being of pure, white light beneath. 5. The light erupted from him, a silent, expanding sphere of absolute null energy. It was not an explosion of sound and fury, but one of perfect, profound silence, a wave of pure nothing. The tendril of the dreamer disintegrated. The mountain-sized face in the storm recoiled. The chaotic, swirling energy of the storm wall was flattened, smoothed, and silenced by the pulse of absolute zero. As the sphere of light expanded, it did not destroy what it touched. It changed it. The mangled steel of the command center was flash fossilized, transformed into a structure of black, crystalline glass. The bodies of the dead were not burned but petrified, turned into perfect, silent statues. Isla held Sophia's hand as the light reached them. There was no pain. There was only a sudden, profound cold and then nothing at all. Her last sight was of Kenji Tanaka. He stood at the center of the silent apocalypse he had created, his arms outstretched. He was no longer a man. The light had turned him into a statue not of glass, but of pure, crystallized lightning. A permanent, screaming antenna at the heart of a dead storm. A human fulgurite. The pulse washed over the entirety of the storm, a shockwave of order silencing the chaos. The wind stopped. The lightning ceased. The pressure equalized. The cage, for now, was reinforced. The dreamer was not destroyed, but it was stunned, forced back into a shallow, fitful slumber by the sheer audacity of its prisoner's final act. And so, Aegis Station remained, no longer a floating vessel, but a silent, crystalline tomb suspended forever in the heart of a now calm, now permanent purple haze. A monument to a battle no one on Earth would ever know had been fought. And at its center, a statue of a man made of lightning, a silent guardian forever broadcasting a single, defiant note of absolute silence into the void, a final, eternal lullaby for the monster that slept below. The end.